ভিতরে মায়ের সে ভাব কেমন বুঝিতে না পারি, সে ভাব কেমন বুঝিতে না পারি, ভাবিতে জনম গেল রে শ্যামা মা কি আমার কালো। শ্যামা কখনো পুরুষ, কখনো প্রকৃতি, কখনো সোনাকার হে, কখনো পুরুষ, কখনো প্রকৃতি, কখনো সোনাকার হে। মায়ের সে ভাব ভাবিয়া কমলাকান্ত, সে ভাব ভাবিয়া কমলাকান্ত, সহসা পাগল হলো রে শ্যামা মা কি আমার কালো রে শ্যামা মা কি আমার কালো।
Ma Tungi Tara is another song dedicated to Mother Kali.
তুমি ত্রিগুণ ভরা পরাত পরা মা তুমি তারা, আমার মা তুমি তারা। আমি জানি মা ওদিন দয়াময়ী, আমি জানি মা ওদিন দয়াময়ী, তুমি দুর্গমেতে দুঃখ ভরা মা তুমি তারা, আমার মা তুমি তারা। তুমি জলে তুমি স্থলে তুমি অর্ঘ মূলে গো মা, তুমি জলে তুমি স্থলে তুমি অর্ঘ মূলে গো মা, আছো সর্বঘটে অর্ঘ পুটে, সর্বঘটে অর্ঘ পুটে, সাকার আকার নিরাকার মাগো, সাকার আকার নিরাকার মা তুমি তারা, আমার মা তুমি তারা। তুমি ত্রিগুণ ভরা পরাত পরা মা তুমি তারা, আমার মা আমার মা আমার মা তুমি তারা।
Our final song pays our respects to the great monk and poet Swami Vivekananda. On his 150th birthday, we genuflect in respect to Swamiji's courage in spreading the word of Vedanta to the world. May he always give us the courage to follow the path, to follow the right path in life.
প্রণাম রেখে যায়, তব চরণ সরোজে প্রণাম রেখে যায়। হে কবি, হে সন্ন্যাসী, প্রণাম রেখে যায়, তব চরণ সরোজে প্রণাম রেখে যায়। হে কবি, তোমার কাব্যগীতি সে যে অসীম শক্তিমান, ডাকিলে সবারে ওহে বীর, ওহে বীর ভাই। তোমার কাব্যগীতি সে যে অসীম শক্তিমান, ডাকিলে সবারে ওহে বীর, ওহে বীর ভাই। ঘুমের দেশে জাগিল সবে, ঘুমের দেশে জাগিল সবে, জীবন মরণ পর। হে নরেন্দ্র বিবেকানন্দ, হে নরেন্দ্র বিবেকানন্দ, প্রণাম রেখে যায়, তব চরণ সরোজে প্রণাম রেখে যায়। হে কবি, হে সন্ন্যাসী, প্রণাম রেখে যায়, তব চরণ সরোজে প্রণাম রেখে যায়। হে যোগী,
I'm honored to be here in the company of these illustrious Swamis and of my learned colleagues from the University of Chicago. And I thank Sumit Rai for inviting me to speak on the topic of the upliftment of the masses. In this setting, I thought it would be appropriate to talk about the role of teaching in Swami Vivekananda's comments and writings involving uplifting the masses. And as a professor of Sanskrit, I think about these things in terms of the Sanskrit intellectual tradition, in which it's customary to begin an exposition with what is called a purvapaksha, that is, a preliminary statement that will then be corrected. So I'll begin by pointing out two apparent difficulties that might occur to someone in connection with Swami Vivekananda's appearance here in Chicago at the World's Parliament of Religions. The source of the first tension would be suggested by the very first sight of Swami Vivekananda and was then referred to him in his opening remarks. After the applause had died down from the greeting, which has already been quoted by Swami Shanta Rupananda, Sisters and Brothers of America, he went on to say, "I thank you in the name of the most ancient order of monks in the world." And I assume that here he's referring to the line of Vedanta Swamis, which went back through his great teacher, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, all the way back through the most famous of the early teachers of Advaita Vedanta, Shankara Bhagavatpada. And the problem here is one which is fresh in my mind because, as it happens in the course on advanced Sanskrit here at the University of Chicago, which began just last week, our text for this quarter is a treatise by that same Shankara on the topic of how to teach a pupil, how to teach the means to liberation. And the problem is that, at least in that work, Shankara is very explicit that this teaching of the Vedanta philosophy is to be given only to Brahmins from pure families who have already memorized the Upanishads and who have already renounced the world and become wandering ascetics. And these are very strict prerequisites, and it's hard to see how they might apply to the masses. And the second problem is that there were reasons to believe, as the days went by in the meeting of the Parliament of Religions here, that Swami Vivekananda might believe that the teaching of philosophy was actually an inappropriate response to the urgent material needs of the masses of India. This became apparent, for example, in an outburst from Swami Vivekananda, which he described as good criticism for the Christian missionaries who were present in the room. He said to them, "You erect churches all through India, but the crying evil in the East is not religion. They have religion enough. It is bread that the suffering millions of burning India cry out for with parched throats. They ask us for bread, but we give them stones. It is an insult to a starving people to offer them religion. It is an insult to a starving man to teach him metaphysics." And so that was the second problem. He went on to say, "We admit that there are evils in India. Everyone can show what those evils are. But he is the friend of mankind who finds a way out of the difficulty. Like the drowning boy and the philosopher, when the philosopher was lecturing him, the boy cried, 'Take me out of the water first.' So our people cry, 'We have had lectures enough, societies enough, papers enough. Where is the man who will lend us a hand to drag us out? Where is the man who really loves us? Where is the man who has sympathy for us?'" So this was the problem that he raised. But as it turned out, in the months that followed the Parliament, these two problems, the problem of restricted access and the problem of the inappropriateness of lectures, both faded away rather quickly when in the actions and words of Swami Vivekananda, who proceeded, in fact, to give lectures on Vedanta philosophy across America and England, it became apparent, first of all, that Swami Vivekananda viewed these restrictions expressed by Shankara on access to the truths of Vedanta to be not eternal truths in themselves, but social arrangements which were subject to change and which no longer applied in the same terms. And it also became apparent that the teaching of Vedanta, at least when it was done by Swami Vivekananda, was no impediment to effective fundraising. So that by the time Swami Vivekananda returned to India some 2.5 years later, he was now speaking about the teaching of Vedanta and its central message of the oneness of the soul as his real purpose for going to America. And he spoke about this from the time of his first address. He landed in Colombo in Sri Lanka, and he referred there to the fact that Indian culture had been in full swing since before the time when, as he put it, the very fathers of the modern Europeans were still living in the forest and painting themselves blue. And he went on to say that knowledge and interest in religion and in philosophy was very widespread in India, and that although probably most Indians were not aware that there had been a Sino-Japanese war, and very few of them might be aware of the tremendous political movements and socialistic movements trying to transform Western society, the fact that there had been a parliament of religions in America and that there was a Hindu sannyasin sent over there was something that even the coolies in India knew about. And he began from that time to speak very clearly in India about the idea of the oneness of all as the thing that would come to the rescue of the Indian masses. So I think in looking back on the problems that are raised by Shankara and his restrictions on access to Vedanta, the problem is best viewed as one of a pedagogical emphasis, that Shankara was interested primarily in enlightening his pupils, and that in his time and place, it was his view that the most powerful tool available to bring about that end was a knowledge of the great statements of the Upanishads, and in his time and place, the people who had that knowledge were the very small group that he had referred to. And I believe that that's the way that Swami Vivekananda viewed it. So that in Shankara's teaching, these Mahavakyas of the Upanishads, which the students came already carrying in their heads, were very potent devices that he could deploy toward their enlightenment. I like to think of them as little time bombs that Shankara saw himself as detonating within their minds. An idea rather similar to that came up in one of the early addresses that Swami Vivekananda gave after returning to India. After landing in Sri Lanka, he began working his way up through Tamil Nadu. And in reply to the address of welcome at one place in southern Tamil Nadu, Swami Vivekananda said this: "If there is one word that you find coming out like a bomb from the Upanishads, bursting like a bombshell upon masses of ignorance, it is the word fearlessness. And the only religion that ought to be taught is the religion of fearlessness. Either in this world or in the world of religion, it is true that fear is the sure cause of degradation and sin. It is fear that brings misery, fear that brings death, fear that breeds evil. And what causes fear? Ignorance of our own nature." So Swami Vivekananda agrees with Shankara on the problem of misery. And he agrees with contemporaries of Shankara, such as the Buddhist philosopher Shantideva, that this misery is connected with fear and it's shared by all of us. But he goes beyond Shankara in his interpretation of fearlessness to teach that it includes the fact that people of all castes are entitled to hear the teaching of the Upanishads. In those early days back in India, he also described in some specific details his own teaching plan, in which he referred again to the Parliament of Religions in Chicago and said, "This plan has been in my mind for a long time, even years before I left the shores of Madras for America, and that I went to America was simply for the propagating of these ideas. I did not care at all for the Parliament of Religions or anything else. It was simply an opportunity for me to spread these ideas. But the great difficulty in the way of this is the Sanskrit language," he went on to say, "this glorious language of ours, and the difficulty cannot be removed until, if it is possible, the whole of our nation are good Sanskrit scholars." Now, as a professor of Sanskrit, this is a goal that I am happy to read about, but to be honest about it, I have to tell you that this is another point on which Swami Vivekananda's views moderated over the following years, and the time would come when he would no longer insist that all Indians learn Sanskrit, but I want to dwell on this point just a moment longer for the benefit of my dean, who makes decisions on hiring in our Sanskrit program. And so the Swami went on to say, "The attempts of the great Ramanuja and of Chaitanya and of Kabir to raise the lower classes of India show that marvelous results were attained during the lifetime of those great prophets. Yet the later failures have to be explained. and cause shown why the effect of their teaching stopped almost within a century of the passing away of those great masters. The secret is here. They raised the lower classes. They had all the wish that these should come up, but they did not apply their energies to the spreading of the Sanskrit language among the masses. Even the great Buddha made one false step when he stopped the Sanskrit language from being studied by the masses. He wanted rapid and immediate results and translated and preached in the language of the day, Pali, and that was grand. He spoke in the language of the people, and the people understood him, and that was great. It spread the ideas quickly, it made them reach far and wide, but along with that, Sanskrit ought to have spread. Knowledge came, but the culture was not there. It is culture that withstands shocks, not a simple mass of knowledge. And finally, he said, the only safety, I tell you men who belong to the lower castes, the only way to raise your condition is to study Sanskrit. To the non-Brahmin castes, I say, wait, be not in a hurry. Do not seize every opportunity of fighting the Brahmin, because, as I have shown, you are suffering from your own fault. Who told you to neglect spirituality and to neglect Sanskrit learning? What have you been doing all this time? Why have you been indifferent? Why do you not become Sanskrit scholars? Why do you not spend millions to bring Sanskrit education to all the castes of India? So I just wanted Dean Roth to hear the part about spending millions on the study of Sanskrit. But the fact is that, as I've said, in following years, Swami Vivekananda went on to talk about somewhat other things. He continued to agree with Shankara that the cause of our bondage is ignorance, and that it's in the Upanishadic scriptures that we can find knowledge to combat that ignorance. And as I've said, he went beyond Shankara in describing to whom that information should be shared. And in fact, in later years, he wrote quite often about Shankara as having been a specialist in the teaching of Vedanta, in that he was very good on the intellectual side of things. He taught Vedanta from the side of the head, but that he could not match other teachers in presenting Vedanta from the side of the heart, so that he compared the intellect of Shankara with the heart of the Buddha, the intellect of Shankara with the heart of Ramanuja. And especially, this was a topic when Swami Vivekananda talked about his fellow Bengali, Sri Krishna Chaitanya. On that point, Swami Vivekananda said, the one had a great head, the other a large heart, and the time was ripe for one to be born, the embodiment of both this head and that heart. The time was ripe for one to be born who, in one body, would have the brilliant intellect of Shankara and the wonderfully expansive, infinite heart of Chaitanya. Such a man was born, and I had the good fortune to sit at his feet for years. The time was ripe, and it was necessary, and he came. And he goes on to talk about how the wonderful part of it was that this man lived only a few miles from a great city in which European thought was very well known, but that this man himself was not a person of great book learning, even though the graduates of universities found in him an intellectual giant. He concluded by saying he was a strange man, this Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. In the following years, in talking about education, Swami Vivekananda went through several different phases in which he changed his views from time to time on the most effective way to spread education in the masses, which he viewed as the most important tool for their uplifting. He thought at one time of founding a college and then abandoned the plan. He talked about his preference later on for door-to-door teaching, and this was what led to the founding of the Ramakrishna Math and of the Ramakrishna Mission. And he also talked about the failure of Indian universities in his own day to accomplish the things that he thought teaching should accomplish. Now, many things have changed since his time. One of them is the status of Sanskrit, which is no longer a key to power in India in the way that it used to be. Another is, sad to say, the liberality of American culture that Swami Vivekananda described in several places. but I have no time to go into that sad topic. So instead, I'll simply say that I would hope that if Swami Vivekananda were still with us today and were able to see developments in American universities, for example, he might have a somewhat rosier view of the possibilities for doing some good through education at a university level. But since I've already talked long enough, I think I will turn that topic over to my dean, Professor Martha Roth. Thank you.
Good afternoon. In January 2012, the University of Chicago accepted a generous gift from the Indian Ministry of Culture to establish a new visiting professorship in Indian studies to commemorate the legacy of the Hindu spiritual leader, Swami Vivekananda. The goal of this gift is to advance the partnership of the University of Chicago with the government and the people of India to advance research and teaching in the rich legacy of India's history. Today, I am pleased to announce the inaugural appointees of the Indian Ministry of Culture Vivekananda Visiting Professorship. The first holder of the Vivekananda Chair will be Sir Christopher Bailey of Cambridge University, England, who will be joining the faculty in South Asian Languages and Civilizations for the Spring Quarter 2014 and Spring Quarter 2015. The second appointee will be David Shulman of Hebrew University, Israel, who will hold the Vivekananda Visiting Professorship also in the Department of South Asian Languages and Civilizations during the following two spring quarters, 2016 and 2017. These two distinguished and accomplished international scholars were selected based on their significant scholarly contributions to their fields and to the alignment of their scholarship with the legacy of Swami Vivekananda. They were selected by an interdisciplinary faculty committee comprised of representatives from the Division of the Humanities, South Asian Languages, as well as English Language and Literature, from the Division of Social Sciences, Anthropology, and the Divinity School. Sir Christopher Bailey holds doctoral degrees from Oxford and Cambridge universities. At Cambridge, he currently holds the Vere Harmsworth Chair of Imperial and Naval History and is the director of their Center of South Asian Studies. Sir Christopher has held numerous visiting appointments at prestigious institutions throughout the United States and Europe. In addition to holding the knighthood for services to history outside Europe, he has been honored by academic societies and institutions, including the British Academy, the Royal Historical Society, the Academia Europaea, the Royal Society of Literature, the Royal Asiatic Society, and the British Museum. In 2005, he received the Wolfson Prize for Lifetime Achievement in History. Bailey's current project, The 20th Century Connections and Comparisons, 1914 to 2014, continues his research into the intellectual history of South Asia in the 19th and 20th centuries. His latest monograph is titled Recovering Liberties, Indian Thought in the Age of Liberalism and Empire, and is the 100th volume in Cambridge University Press's Ideas in Context book series. The second holder of the visiting chair will be, as I said, David Shulman, currently the Renee Lang Professor of Humanistic Studies in the Department of Comparative Religion at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. His PhD is from the University of London. An expert on Indian languages and poetics, as well as South Indian religious history, Shulman's extensive publications include scholarly works, translations, and original poetry. Most recently, he published More Than Real, A History of the Imagination in South India, published by Harvard University Press in 2012, and co-authored several books with Telugu scholar Velchero Narayana Rao, a visitor here at the University of Chicago. Shulman's memoirs, Dark Hope, Working for Peace in Israel and Palestine, and Spring Heat Reigns, A South Indian Diary, were both released by the University of Chicago Press. Shulman has been the recipient of National Endowment for the Humanities research grants, as well as fellowships from the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation and the MacArthur Foundation. During their times on campus, Professors Bailey and Shulman will each offer classes and participate in the intellectual life of the university through conversations with students and colleagues. They will also each offer a public lecture organized in cooperation with the Chicago office of the Consul General of India that will share their research with a wider audience. We look forward to the arrival of these distinguished scholars and teachers on our campus. They will invigorate scholarly dialogue concerning Indian literature, philosophy, poetics, and social history, and will advance our cultural and educational cooperation. It is my great honor here to publicly thank once again the Indian Ministry of Culture for its vision and partnership with the University of Chicago. Thank you.
Namastriyati Rajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine Hari Om Tat Sat. I bow down to Swami Vivekananda, the foremost among the all-renouncing monks, and who is the remover of miseries, being the embodiment of existence, knowledge, and bliss. Friends, at the outset, I like to congratulate and thank the authority of the Spiritual Life Office, University of Chicago, and South Asian Studies for organizing this excellent program to celebrate the 150th birth anniversary of Swami Vivekananda. And I also congratulate Martha Roth, the Dean of the Humanities, for declaring the Swami Vivekananda chair position. It will go a long way, I believe, in developing the cultural bond between the young America and the ancient India. Friends, this moment we are sitting here in this grand, beautiful, huge chapel named after a famous billionaire philanthropist, Rockefeller. Why? To celebrate the 150th birth anniversary of a famous, all-renouncing but penniless monk, Swami Vivekananda. Very interestingly, many of you must be knowing, though it is a lesser-known fact, that these two great personalities, the representatives of spirituality and the material prosperity, a sannyasin and the billionaire, Swami Vivekananda and the John Rockefeller met in 1893 here in Chicago. After the Parliament of Religion, Vivekananda became very famous and popular among the educated Americans. Mr. Rockefeller must have heard about him but never tried to meet him. Swamiji was staying in one of his Rockefeller's friend's house, and one day, as if on impulse, Rockefeller went into the house of his friend, brushed aside the butler, walked unannounced into Swamiji's study. Emma Calvé, the then famous opera singer, narrated this unique incident to her friend, Madame Bardier. Without even lifting his eyes, Swamiji started telling the Rockefeller about his past and asked him to donate. Why don't you give back to society what you have got from the society? Visibly irritated that someone could advise him in this manner, John Rockefeller walked out of the room without even saying goodbye. Swami Vivekananda showed no reaction. 2 weeks later, Rockefeller came back, met Swamiji, gave him a paper pledging a huge sum of money to public welfare, and that was the first time of a huge donation Rockefeller gave, and he said to Swamiji, well, there you are, you can thank me for it. Swamiji quietly read the pledge, looked at Mr. Rockefeller, and with a smile said, you should thank me. Friends, I am here to speak in brief the contribution of Swami Vivekananda, and this is the contribution of Vivekananda. He was transforming the human psychology, the mind. Here we find the great personality, very strong personality, like Rockefeller. It's not so easy to influence. And in India also he influenced another a millionaire, and that also Jamsetji Tata. We find almost everywhere he is going, talking with people. Just imagine